Coming tonight, we'll start with the call to order and the Pledge of Allegiance. The flag is back there. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Dr. Brenner, do you have any additions or corrections to the agenda?
I do not, Mr. President.
If not, do we have a motion and a second? So we have a motion by Mr. Palmasino and a second by Mr. Douthit. Any questions, comments? Seeing none, assuming a roll call vote, all those in favor, please state aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Let's move on to item 3, which is approval of the February 28th minutes. They're on the electronic pages 2 through 5. Were there any corrections or additions to those minutes? Seeing none, do we have a motion and a second? We have a motion by Mr. Carpenter, a second by Dr. Schab. Assuming a roll call vote, all those in favor, please state aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Ladies and gentlemen, we are about to convene into the public comment period for our meeting. Although state law does not require us to hold a public comment period, we have chosen to do so because we believe it is crucial for us to hear from our community members about their concerns and issues. Having said that, please note that the board is here to listen. The public comment period is not designed to be a discussion. Accordingly, please do not expect the board to respond to any comments or questions. This is because we take your concerns and questions seriously, and we want to have sufficient time to process and research issues if need be. We will, however, respond to your questions and concerns at a future meeting or have the proper staff get back to you at the appropriate time. I also want to point out that under state and federal privacy laws, we are unable to entertain any comments or questions about school personnel. Please know, however, that we take personnel concerns very seriously. On these matters, we would ask that you go through appropriate administrative channels. Finally, we recognize that right now our nation and our community are polarized by a number of issues. That said, we want our school board meetings to serve as an example to our students, and that members of our school board and members of our community can deal with controversial issues in a civil manner and demonstrate mutual respect for each other. In that spirit, we will insist that all speakers and members of the audience and school board maintain civility and respect for any divergent views that others possess. We ask that speakers please address their comments to the board directly. Finally, I want to remind everyone that you may submit written comments at any time to the board in lieu of speaking during the public comment period, if you so choose. Each individual speaker is allowed up to 3 minutes. This individual time limit will be enforced so that if others want to speak in the public, they may do so. Right now, I only have one card, and if Mr. Loff, if you could just come to the microphone and speak.
Okay, thank you. I'm Chris Loff. I'm a teacher at South Middle School, and I'm here tonight so that you know, community know, and parents know what's been happening in our district under the language of diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is our district's transgender policy. I'm just going to read it. It says, the principal or designee shall request a meeting with the transgender or gender nonconforming student and their parent/guardian. Down here, however, it says school staff shall not disclose any information that may reveal a student's transgender status to others, including parents or guardians and other school staff, unless legally required to do so or the student has authorized such disclosure. That seems like a contradiction. In the back, under restroom, it says students shall have access to a restroom that corresponds to their gender identity. Under locker room, it says, in most cases, the district shall provide the student access to the locker room that corresponds to the gender identity they assert at school. On February 24th, teachers received training. They received this document. It's entitled, Defining LGBTQ Words for Elementary School Students. I want to repeat, this is for elementary school students. Some of the definitions are cisgender, gender expansive, non-binary, sex assigned at birth, transgender, pansexual, and queer. North Dakota state law prohibits the teaching of critical race theory. It defines it as, critical race theory means the theory that racism is not merely the product of individual bias or prejudice, but that racism is systemically embedded in American society and the American legal system to facilitate racial inequality. So I just want to repeat, we are prohibited from teaching that racism is systemically embedded in the American society. However, on February 25th, South Middle School and Lake Agassiz School teachers received this training. I'm going to show now a video and a bunch of slides from this training.
Addressing Race and Trauma in the Classroom, a resource for educators. This resource recommends the following for all educators. Learn about the impacts of history and systemic racism and other forms of oppression. And we would add, teach about those impacts.
So as you just heard, systemic racism and teach about those impacts. Here's some other slides.
Please wrap it up. Your 3 minutes to come
Sure. I'm just going to zip through these. Name the impacts of history and systemic oppression. Under cultural humidity, learn about the impacts of history and systemic racism and other forms of oppression. Please note the language systemic. Honor the impacts of history and systemic oppression. We learned that racism is institutionalized. We learned that to identify the intersections between the isms, including colonialism, white supremacy, anti-blackness, heterosexism, transphobia, linguicism, ableism, etc. We learned that race is constructed by racism. We learned about the intersectionality of identities and oppression. We learned that intersectionality of racism, heterosexism, and cis-normativity. We learned about implicit bias.
You're way past
We learned
your
about
3
power
minutes.
and
Please
privilege.
wrap up.
We learned
Please
about
wrap up, sir.
microaggression. Yep. And then we were told to apply this. It says, what is one action step you will take to apply what you've learned today? What is one strategy or action step that you will apply what you've learned about CARE, R being racism, and other inequalities in your school? And very last thing, on January 17th, the district hired Dr. Anthony Mohammed, who told us that our society is further away from Dr. King's vision now than we were in the 1960s. Current education is educational apartheid, and like Jamestown, and exemplary schools and failing schools are the new Jim Crow. And he told us that meritocracy is a toxic school culture. So I think it's clear that gender ideology and critical race theory is in our schools. So I ask the board members to please, let's stop this. Thank you.
Let's move on to item 5, which is superintendent's recommendations for discussion. 5A is review school board meeting norms, which is on your electronic page 6. Mr. Manley.
The school board meeting norms: be prepared, be on time, value and respect each other, exercise thoughtful deliberation and conversation, be professional at the board table and when visiting with the general public, speak up when the norms are not being followed, and advocate on behalf of students and keep the community in mind.
Thank you, Jeff. Let's move on to item 5B, which is public forum planning, which is on electronic pages 7 through 44. Dr. Brenner.
Thank you, Dr. Lunn. I'm going to draw your attention to 2 pieces that have been updated. Page 17, which is also page, let's see, yeah. No, it's not page 17. It was where Dr. Shab asked us to include under some of the district initiatives, I'm sorry, it's electronic page 17, the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging piece that we've been working on, so you'll see that in red font underlined. So that's on page 17. That would be an update from our last meeting. And then the other piece that I'll draw your attention to that might require a little bit of conversation, we took your feedback on page 44, the electronic page 44, the small group input page, the questions, where we have 4 questions for our participants. First of all, in number 1, we've updated the Valley Middle School cost to $55 million, so that has moved from 42.5 to 55, and that was really a compromise landing between 50 and 59 million. to get the appropriate square feet that we would need for that middle school. And we also indicated which includes a child nutrition facility. On the second question, because that number went up so high for Valley Middle School, Mr. Arnold and I had a conversation about whether we really want to try to bundle all three of those middle schools. If we do, we're going to be back at that number, probably exceeding the number from June 2021. So in this iteration, we just talked about Valley Middle School and then including Schrader Middle School. Upgrading that space, which would be another 21 million added onto the 55. So you can see the numbers are climbing quickly. Would certainly be open to feedback. The other piece of that is that we indicated what would be done at Schrader Middle School, addressing ADA, air quality, a new roof, updating instructional spaces, updating the suite for medically fragile students, redoing the parking lot, et cetera. So I know that wasn't the desire of the board during our last conversation. So again, open to feedback. If you want to leave South Middle School bundled in there, we would just change what that final number would be. So those are the two major changes from our last meeting.
Clarifying questions or comments from board members? Go ahead, Doug.
The amount for South was approximately 20 million, 19 or 20? Or?
Yes.
I had just one quick one. Under the revenue growth, the federal revenue growth, it went up quite a bit in 2021. I just wonder if somebody couldn't mention that it went up because I'm assuming it was the COVID dollars that we got from the federal government. It looks like it went up like 21% or something. So.
That would be COVID. Michelle, do you want to respond to that as well? Okay.
Thank you. Other clarifying questions or comments from board members? You look like you're thinking, Cynthia. Do you want to go ahead?
I've been thinking about the word "some" on question 2. I'll just read that section. A major investment in Schrader Middle School and some investment in South Middle School.
That's crossed off. So that's been replaced with the below.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Thanks. Sorry.
So the word "some" is gone.
So I think it's fine to have a question that asks for that feedback myself. I mean,
For all three?
for all three. That would be my opinion. Reason I was thinking about this, I was thinking about the work of the task force, and I see that we have a member of the task force, that we had going on, and, that was I know it was a different school because it was the elementary schools, but it was a bigger dollar amount. So I think I was kind of thinking that it's okay that we put in question 2 $80 million here because that was based a little bit more in line with what they had found, even though I know that last time I expressed an interest in the $42.5 million referendum, which I'm still leaning towards, but I don't think it hurts to ask.
Other comments from other board members? I guess my one question would be: would you separate it out and have Schrader as a question, have Middle South as a question, or would you roll it together? And I guess Cynthia, you're the one that talked about it, so I'll ask you first.
I think it's fine the way it is, separated.
Well, it's my point is it's not separated. It's Valley, and then it's South and Schrader together. Or Valley and Schrader together. Other thoughts, Chris? You had your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just to confirm, and thank you, Dr. Brenner, I think you answered the question. So what we're looking at is there's a Valley Middle School statement, and then there's a Schrader Middle School statement, correct? Is South removed from the second? South is removed from the second question, so we're looking at Valley and Schrader. Okay, just to confirm. Thank you.
And then Cynthia brought up the issue: should we put the South part back into that question? Go ahead, Amber.
My personal opinion is that we were at 76 alone, just with the 55 and 21. I think a lot of the feedback that I heard from people was that the first ask was too much, even hovering around 85 to 90 million. And so even being at, 76 is getting close to that 80. So I think it shows that we are still honoring the task force recommendation in terms of doing our updates. We've taken some of the COVID dollars and addressed some variety of facility things as well. But I think that we need to be strategic in which spaces are the most priority needs, and not appearing like we're asking too much.
Other comments, questions? Go ahead, Doug.
I think getting up to 96 or more is too much, but it might not hurt to ask the question. Would you, and if you support Valley and Trader, would you support additional $20 million for these purposes for South in the same bond issue? I mean, at any point, they can say no. They could say no to the very first question. They could say no to the second. Then they could ask the third, and they could say no, or they could say yes, oh, yes, and then, oh, no, that one, now we're getting up too high. I mean, we could get their feedback. That's all we're asking at this point is feedback. So I'm okay with just asking the two, but I can see a potential benefit of asking the third question too. But, I mean, we're at the very end, so we got to decide now if we're going to do it or not.
We can't leave the room tonight without deciding. I would suggest if we do ask it, we ask it as three different things, rather than Valley's one and then Schrader and South are another. I would ask it as three different questions if we're going to ask. Jackie, any thoughts? Go ahead, Amber.
I'll just add one more thing. I'm not afraid of asking the question. I think my fear is how we've seen these things get interpreted in the public eye at times, where it will say on this document, we're just asking for feedback, and people will take this and put it on Facebook and say, the district is coming to us to ask us for $96 million, and this is what they're going to do. Especially if people weren't at the forum, it could be taken out of context. So again, I'm not afraid to ask a question and have the conversations. I do think if we do ask for South, Schrader, and Valley, that we need to break that out and be very specific that, especially this document that goes out, that we are asking for feedback to determine the best path forward based on the task force recommendation, based on the money available, based on our facility needs. But I also think that the school board needs to say, these are our priorities. What will you support? Instead of giving an entire menu of options and have people pick and choose. I think it's totally fine for us to say, this is what we think is the highest need based on the expertise of our facilities people, and then just put it out there.
Any thoughts, Bill?
Well, a couple. I guess, the 55 million came as a little bit of a shocker that it went up, that much. And for me, that's as high as I would like to see us go. I don't see much over that, even if this group said, yeah, we're good for it. But let's remember, majority of the people that come to these forums are our supporters, are not the no voters out there. And I think we have to be very careful how we interpret what response we get at this forum.
Jeff, thoughts that you have?
Yeah, I think if we get close to that 80, 90 million again, like Bill said, I think that's sort of a shocker to everybody, and it might be a little tough. But on the other hand, too, like Amber was saying, does it hurt to ask? So I guess I could go either way on that one. But just the warning, that 100 million or the 90 million is quite a shocker.
Other thoughts? I mean, I'll give you my 2 cents. I mean, we could go questions 1 through 33. You know, Mr. Arnold's sitting back there and he talks about the hundreds of millions of dollars of deferred maintenance we have. I mean, we're just talking about 3 different things. There's a whole longer list than that. But my personal thought is we should stick with what administration has recommended. Not that South Middle School doesn't need work. It does need work, even though it's only 22 years old. It does, but so do a lot of the other schools. But I think the more complicated we make it, the more confusion there is, the more difficult it is to explain. So my personal thought would be just leave it what has been proposed. But again, I think it's not up to me. It's not up to Dr. Brenner. It's up to the board as a whole. So go ahead, Doug.
I'm comfortable with us just doing with the 2 questions, but we all have to realize that that just pushes $20 million plus whatever additional cost it grows between now and the next request that we ask of the voters. So it doesn't go away.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with you. I think the other thing that we probably need to do, and I know Chris Arnold has been trying to do for the last few years, is talk about, well, here's long range. Here's what we need to do now. This boiler's out. We need to fix this. But here's what we're going to need to do. Here's what we're going to have to tackle in the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. And I think we have to continue to educate the public about that because it isn't going to go away with this next referendum. I agree with you. Go ahead, Cynthia.
I'm going back to the question 1. Will people know that the child nutrition facility serves the whole district? Like, we know that, but to be honest, before I was a board member, I actually thought every school prepared their own food.
So add something parenthetically behind that.
I think, which, I just thought of this, which includes a new district-wide child nutrition facility or something like that. Because that's why it got bigger, right? Is that why the price tag here got bigger?
No, Mr. Arnold, are you prepared to come to the microphone and talk about how Valley went from 42.5 to 55? Okay.
He's not, so we'll answer for him, no. No, I think part of it is the cost of Valley, but also part of it is the child nutrition facility. Chris, even though you're not prepared, you're going to be more prepared than the rest of us.
So those numbers are reflecting current building prices that we are seeing in today's market. So not only did the price to build just a Valley go up quite a bit, but we also went back to the original master plan that JLG gave us approximately 5 years ago that proposed approximately, I can't remember how many square feet, it's on your guys' memo, so many square foot addition to Mark Sanford Center for the child nutrition. That value that was given then was also updated. There was additional considerations given to the civil work that would need to occur at the site. When I say civil work, civil engineering work as in parking lots, new athletic fields, really to complement the entire site, and then also factored in a demolition cost for Valley. Again, very preliminary numbers, but the numbers that you are seeing to build a building are very reflective of today's market. So it kind of tells you how volatile everything is getting to in regards to price. So hopefully that makes sense.
Thank you, sir. Yeah. Other comments from board members? I'm looking towards you two. Are you comfortable with keeping it the way it is right now? It's not to say that in our small groups, because it's happened before where we go off on a tangent and we talk about other things. So I think, any and all feedback is going to be appreciated. So, okay. Well, let's plan on keeping it with the addition of making sure that we make sure people know it's a district-wide child nutrition facility, not just a Valley Middle School facility. Okay. Did you have anything else about the referendum?
Nope, thank you. Appreciate the feedback.
Thank you. Let's move on to item 6, which is Superintendent's recommendations for action. 6A is consent agenda, which is on the electronic pages 45 through 56. Do we have a motion and a second for the consent agenda?
Motion to approve.
We have a motion by Dr. Schab, second by Mr. Carpenter. Assuming a roll call vote, all those in favor, please state aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Let's go on to 6B, which is the audited financial statements. And Brian Opsahl from Brady Martz and Associates is here. Brian, thank you for spending your next 3 hours with us at this meeting going over the report.
I don't think anybody wants that. Thank you. I am Brian Upsall from Brady Martz and Associates. I did present to the Finance Committee a week or so ago, and so I'll go through things relatively quick tonight. So if there are any questions, feel free to ask them at any time. Starting with District Number 1, one of the things that we go over with the Audit Committee is what's called required communication, and it's related to difficulties or difficulties within the audit process, disagreements with management. We're pleased to report that we didn't have any of those. We appreciate all the help and support that we got. It certainly makes our job easy when we get timely responses, et cetera. District Number 1 did have one accounting method change related to what's known as GASB 84. It's related to fiduciary activities. And so one of the things that you're going to notice when you look at your financial statements is that the student activity funds, which used to be reported in its own fund, is now rolled in and is reported within the general fund. So it is broken out when we look at the budget to actual statement, but that is a change that would not have been there in prior years. The audit opinion is unmodified, so it's considered a good or clean opinion that the financial statements are fairly stated in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. In a nutshell, it's management's responsibility for the numbers to ensure that they're fairly stated, and then we audit those numbers. So even though we as auditors help prepare the financial statements, I think it's just worthy of noting that at the end, it is still management's responsibility for those numbers. On a full accrual level, the district's ending net position was a little bit under $6 million deficit. This is related to the involvement in the TFFR pension plan, and so if you take that number out of there, you're closer to $86.7 million overall fund balance on a full accrual level. This is up about $1.38 million from the prior year. At the fund level, the general fund ended with an unassigned fund balance of $6,702,892 of unassigned fund balance. And when I presented to the Finance Committee, one of the questions that got brought up during that process was a budgeted transfer from the Special Reserve Fund. And so that, at that point in time, had not been made. So between that time and the final audit report, we did make, or there was a transfer made between those two funds that's reflected in the final audit report. So I just wanted to point that out, that the numbers are a little bit different than what the Finance Committee looked at in a good way within the general fund. All funds at the end of the fiscal year had positive fund balances. And one of the things that we also look at is we take your general fund unassigned fund balance divided by your general fund expenditures, and you're sitting around 5.7%. And so I just want to point that out, and I think there's plans in place to increase that over the next few years. So budget to actual, the budget was quite a bit better than what was anticipated. The revenues came in higher due to additional federal funding, a lot to do with the COVID monies. And due to that also, when we did our single audit, we ended up testing 3 different programs this year. So we tested the Coronavirus Relief Fund, Title I Fund, and ESSER dollars, and we had unmodified opinions on all 3 of those programs as well, what's known as a single audit. And then lastly, within the audit report is the Government Auditing Standards Letter, which is a high-level overview of the internal control structure at the school district, and we do believe we had no findings or comments on that report. We also didn't have any management letter comments to report either, which is just kind of indicating that your control processes appear to be implemented and operated effectively. So any questions on District Number 1?
Any questions from any board members? No, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Moving on then to the Air Base District 140. Once again, we've issued an unmodified or clean opinion on the financial statements, so that is considered a good opinion. On a full accrual level, all of the funds are considered unrestricted, a little bit over $3.9 million, which is up about $312,000 from the prior year. The general fund ended with a fund balance of $4,223,630, and that was up about $639,377 from the prior year. Budget was up about $285,000, or the revenues were over budget by about $285,000. Expenses were under budget by about $355,000. So it was a positive variance from what was anticipated. For the single audit report on the airbase, we test the impact aid program. And so once again, we had an unmodified or clean opinion on that program. And the government auditing standards letter, once again, no issues as far as the internal controls at the district. So the pretty quick run through of District 140. Any questions on that one?
Any questions for Brian? Just a quick comment. People complain to me about how these doctors talk in these funny languages and stuff. I can tell you after reading this, so you guys talk in a funny language as well, but you explain it so well, so I appreciate that. Any further questions or comments to Brian? If not, the administrative recommendation is to approve the audit report for Districts 1 and 140 as received. We have a motion by Jeff and we have a second by Chris. Assuming a roll call vote, all those in favor, please state aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Brian, thank you so much, and thank your team so much for the great work you do. Appreciate
Thank you.
Let's move on to item 6C, which is request for bond portion of the new 10 mil voter-approved building fund, electronic pages 173 and 174. Dr. Brenner.
Thank you, Dr. Lund. I'm just going to read this memo because it's pretty straightforward. This memorandum provides a formal recommendation for approval of the bonding of $1 million from the new 10 mil voter-approved building fund. The projects that will be executed with the bonded dollars, estimated to be around roughly $16 million, have been presented in previous meetings with both the Finance and Facility Committees, or the full board. During the previous Facilities, Finance, and Public Forum Planning work session on 28 February, a list of projects was presented that provided the basis for bonding $1 million for 20 years. The $1 million payments will be made from the new 10 mil voter-approved building fund. This fund generates approximately $2.5 million annually. The list of projects tentatively approved during that meeting is attached, so you'll be able to see that in handout 1. Prior documents presented to both the Finance and Facilities or full school board committee show the project's proposed focuses on indoor air quality, safety, and security. These facility improvements align with the district's strategic plan and provide solutions for several campuses. They will improve the learning environment for both our students and for our teaching staff. It's the administrative recommendation that the board approves the bonding of $1 million from the new 10 mil voter-approved building fund for a 20-year bond period. And if the board would choose to do that, at our March 28th meeting, there'll be a formal resolution that you would vote on that really finalizes this deal.
Clarifying questions or comments? Seeing none, do we have a motion to approve this? We have a motion by Bill to approve it and a second by Doug. Assuming a roll call vote, all those in favor, please state aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. Let's move on to item 6D, which is approval of fiscal year 22 and fiscal year 23 construction projects. Electronic pages 175 and 176. Director of Buildings and Grounds, Chris Arnold, has the floor for the next few. Chris.
All right. Thank you, Board President. Members of the board, on page 175 of 248, memorandum that discusses the approval of construction projects for fiscal year 22, which is our current fiscal year, and next fiscal year 23. This memorandum addresses construction projects that will be funded through various funding sources. ESSER, our building fund, which is sometimes referred to as a construction fund, and also our energy savings company's ESCO fund. The work leading up to this, it was a result of a facility finance and public forum planning session that occurred back in late February. Really, the projects center in on indoor air quality and safety and security. And it also talks about where the, the additional funding coming from the bonding and how that all relates across. So that's kind of that attachment, which is, I guess, referred to as handout 2. Lays out how ESSER 3 funds will be used over at Ben Franklin Elementary for an HVAC replacement. The 10 mil construction fund, or the building fund, I refer to them, they're the same. I don't want to confuse anybody. But you will see the $1 million placeholder that was just approved in our previous memo. And then the outlines the additional project work such as roof replacements, window replacements, some ADA work, and then some contingency and annual savings dollars. Last on that list is the energy savings projects. These include LED lighting, HVAC replacement at Viking, Lake Agassiz, HVAC controls commissioning. And with this approval, just so we have everything straight, this will signal the district to press ahead with ICS Consulting, who is our approved energy savings consultant, to formally begin design on the work for the ESCO. I think that encompasses everything from the memo. Any questions?
Clarifying questions, comments? Go ahead, Cynthia.
So don't get mad at me.
No, that's all right.
The pools, Central and Red River, are we, based on the tours that I've been on, are we just we're just sitting on those at this point, correct?
Yeah, so Red River's pool is in major disrepair. Probably more, a lot of money would need to go into that pool, and it really doesn't meet any of the district's athletic needs. We are kind of, and when I say we, B&G, we are probably kind of waiting for the Career Impact Academy to formulate and take shape and find out which spaces within Red River are going to be vacated. I think that would be a really good time to look at Red River and including the pool space and include that all into some sort of rework of that particular area. Now, the Central High School pool is a little bit different problem to deal with. Ultimately, it's going to depend on where the city, the park district, us, UND, everybody heads with a pool. So that one's really hard to define, but yes, it is sitting in the background as a potential project that we may need to address sooner than later. We're trying to let the park district, and Bill, you probably know this better than I do, I think they just put out a agreement for a consulting group to do a feasibility study, if I'm not mistaken. So we probably want to let that play out and see where we're at in the process. But I know we have formally had talks with UND, in 2024 is our last year that we can use the Hislop pool. So it is coming.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's not good news, Cynthia, sorry. Yeah.
Other clarifying questions or comments? If not, the recommendation is to approve the projects found on page 176, formerly known as handout number 2.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Okay. Assuming a roll call vote, all those in favor, please state aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Next item is 6E, which is selection of architectural sundry services, not laundry, sundry services, which is on pages 177 through 179, and we're back to our Director of Buildings and Grounds.
All right, thank you, Board President. This memorandum was the result of a North Dakota Century Code designated process for selecting architectural services, and in this case it refers to sundry services. And sundry services for buildings and grounds, just so you understand what that means, are the types of projects that can add up quickly, but they're yet kind of fairly small. So we're limited by North Dakota Century Code what we can expend with a vendor during one time period. So $35,000 is the threshold for the initial spend, and $70,000 over a 12-month rolling period. And as you can imagine, it does not take long to get over that threshold. with the resources we have. So the district went through and established a selection committee and put out a RFQ to local area architectural firms to provide architectural services. From that solicitation, we received 5 responses, and we reviewed or interviewed all 5 responses. These responses were scored in accordance with North Dakota Century Code and provided a result of 3 firms that the district would like to proceed with. Those include EAPC, JLG, and Icon Architectural Firms. You will find on the attachments, we have the scoring, the agency selection scoring results. And then on the second memorandum behind that is actually the agency selection committee. This agency selection committee this round was consistent of 3 of the 5 members. We were absent our business manager and our assistant superintendent.
Clarifying questions or comments for Mr. Arnold? If not, the recommendation is to approve the 3 firms to do the architectural sundry services, which I had to look up, which means various kinds is the word. So I had to look it up. So go ahead, Doug. Motion by Doug. Do we have a second? Second by Chris. Assuming a roll call vote, all those in favor, please state aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Let's move on to item 6F, which is approval of the Career Impact Academy Construction Manager at Risk on electronic pages 180 and 181. Back to you, Chris.
All right, thank you, Board President. Another memorandum for a selection committee. This selection of a CMAR is in accordance with North Dakota Century Code Chapter 48. This is a little bit different process than what we had to play through for the architectural selection committee. Because North Dakota Century Code plays with CMARs and CMs, construction managers, a little bit differently. We have to develop some different committees. So one of the bigger changes is that we have to develop a selection committee with a registered architect, a registered engineer, an administrative representative from the governing body, and also a licensed contractor. We were very appreciative of the individuals that volunteered their time to assist the district in the selection process. It took us approximately 2 days of initial reviews of all of our submissions, and then also another day of interviews. Those folks were Mike McLean, Jay Clevin, Chris Arnold, myself, Ryan Junt, and Eric Gillies. Now, the 2 from our licensed contractors, they voted as one. There was not a double vote there. The selection committee did receive 4 written responses to our CMAR that we advertised. The 4 proposals came in from construction engineers, PCL Community, McGough, and Roars. After initial review of all 4 scores, or all 4 proposals, 3 rose to the top: construction engineers, PCL Community Contractors, and McGough. We did not interview Roars. We evaluated the firms based on project experience, workload, availability, and capacity, personnel, safety record, familiarity with the location, fees and expenses, and compliance with the law. And you'll see on the second page of that memo, we outlined the initial scores that led us to our 3 that we interviewed. Once we interviewed the 3, we scored the 3 again by that same scoring metric, rubric that we used before, and PCL Community Contractors was the committee's selection. Any questions for me?
Clarifying questions or comments? Board members, go ahead, Cynthia.
I didn't look this up. Are these all local?
Yes, so Construction Engineers is a Grand Forks firm. PCL Community is also based out of, Community Contractors is also based out of Grand Forks. PCL, I think, is a little bit of both, and then McGough is actually a Fargo, is their closest office, and Roars is, their closest office is also in Fargo. Yep.
Other clarifying questions or comments? If not, the recommendation is to approve PCL Community Contractors as the Career Impact Academy Construction Manager at risk. Do we have a motion?
I'll make that motion.
Who said that? Cynthia, okay. I thought so. I just wanted to make sure. Cynthia, do we have a second? Second by Bill. Assuming a roll call vote, all those in favor, please state aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Mr. Arnold, you're retired. Thank you. Let's move on to item 6G, which is policy review. It is on electronic pages 182 through 217. Dr. Shab.
We're so far ahead here that I think for these first readings, we should take these individually. I believe that's protocol. Is that correct? Do I need to take these individually?
You do not need to, but it's your prerogative. You're the chair of that.
Then I won't,
Committee.
because I don't think there's any, I'll just read them all. If there's one that you want to have pulled off, I'm fine with that, but let me just say that this is the first reading of the following procedures. ABAB, school year and calendar, and I'll just name the names, so, because I think that's helpful for the public. School board committees, board meeting procedures, procedure for adopting board policy, public schools foundation, that's really for our foundation for education, complaints about personnel, superintendent's role in negotiations, superintendent grievance procedure, superintendent recruitment and appointments, board superintendent relations, and federal fiscal compliance. I'd make a motion to approve all 11 of those policies as our first reading.
Do we have a second? Second by Mr. Douthit. Now let's open it up for any questions or comments about any of those policies that have been outlined. Seeing none, we have a motion and a second. Assuming a roll call vote, all those in favor, please state aye.
Aye.
Aye. Pose same sign. Motion carries. Back to you, Dr. Shab.
So our next one is to complete the required reading and adoption of the following board regulations, crisis management, and the superintendent job description.
Is that a motion?
All right, I'll make a motion to approve those.
Do we have a second? Second by Bill. Any further clarifying questions or comments about those two? Seeing none, assuming a roll call vote, all those in favor, please state aye.
Aye.
Aye. Pose same sign. Motion carries. Back to you, Dr. Shab.
So lastly, we have a need to rescind policies, 1003 communications, 1300 citizens assistance to schools. Some of these are quite old. 1301 community right to know, 1306 social services department, 2140 crisis management, and which we just adopted as a board regulation, and job description superintendent of schools. I make a motion to rescind those policies.
Do we have a second to that motion? Second by Jeff. Any further clarifying questions or comments? There never is, because Cindy Johnson does such a great job explaining what's gone on with all this that it's self-explanatory after hers. So, assuming a roll call vote, all those in favor, please state aye.
Aye.
Aye. Pose same sign. Motion carries. Thank you, Dr. Shab. Let's move on to item 6H, which is Superintendent Evaluation Committee Report. The evaluation is on electronic pages 218 through 246, and the contract is on pages 247 and 248. Jeff?
The Superintendent Evaluation Committee met on March 7th. Committee members reviewed input from the both boards, the Grand Forks School Board and the Air Force School Board. We reviewed the 6 domains: goal and vision settings, board relations, curriculum and student support services, human resource management, community relations, and operations and resource management. All those areas were rated satisfactory. Dr. Brenner expressed his appreciation for the comments that are made on that review. And there was discussion during the meeting about possibly tweaking the survey page or the instrument to include something for NA answers, which has been ongoing for a few years, sort of how do we do that if we don't have enough information. But so there was discussion on that. Also discussed, let's see, where was I? New 3-year contract for Dr. Brenner effective July 1st, 2022 through June 30th, 2025. We discussed an increase for Dr. Brenner for the 22-23 and decided, or we're putting forward a motion for his first year to increase by 2.14%, which is the same amount as the increase received by the teacher in their first year of the contract. And in 23-24, the same kind of situation with the teachers, his contract would go 2.38%. We also reviewed some policies and exhibits, and we decided that we could delete the 3rd and 4th paragraphs under the evaluation process in policy CAAB.
And those policies aren't coming here quite yet because they'll go to policy review
Policy
committee
review
first,
first.
and then we'll be here.
That's right. So I guess the outcome of this was that we ranked satisfactory in all areas, and we'd like to thank Dr. Brenner for his continued excellence.
So I think we need probably 2 separate motions. I think we should tackle the evaluation first, and we would need a motion and a second to approve the evaluation as outlined by Jeff.
Move approval.
Do we have a second? Second by Jackie. Clarifying questions or comments for Jeff or any of the committee members? Seeing none, assuming a roll call vote, all those in favor, please state aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Jeff, did you have any other comments about the contract?
Sorry, there's one other, I think on the contract, which is on electronic documents, 247 and 248, there was a little change for the Memorial Day holiday, as well as slightly increasing the professional dues that we pay for Dr. Brenner.
So is that a motion to approve the contract as outlined, Jeff? Okay, so we have a motion by Jeff. Do we have a second? Second by Doug. Any further clarifying questions or comments regarding the contract? Seeing none, assuming a roll call vote, all those in favor, please state aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Let's move on to item 7, other announcements. Dr. Brenner.
Yes, this one hot off the press today. Exciting news that the State Committee approved Grand Forks' application for the Career Impact Academy, so they are going to fully fund the Career Impact Academy at $10 million. So that, coupled with our almost $11 million at the local level, is a win across the finish line. So we're happy to hear that today, and onward and upward. I know Mr. Arnold will be having some meetings here with city personnel as early as this week, Wednesday. They're going to be talking about the demolition process of, let's just call it the old Holiday Inn because it had so many names after that. And then looking at that groundwork and starting to prepare that. So it's a big day for Grand Forks.
Thank you. Melissa, any announcements from the teachers? Okay. Hopefully everybody's getting recharged this week for the following week, so thank you. Any announcements from board members? Okay, thank you. Let's move on to item B, which is board requests for future consideration. Okay, let's move on to item C, school board norms. Jeff, how did we do?
We did excellent.
Thank you. We're going to have you announce those more often. So, okay, we are adjourned. Have a great evening, everyone.